Hello, my name is Brent Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. My videos are being live now on Facebook, also on YouTube, and also on Odyssey, all to do with what I would call um, live and with murder by injection by Eustace Mullins. This book was written in 1989, as well as I recollect, and we're going to try to do a little bit of reading tonight upon it. And the contents is he starts out with chapter 1, the medical monopoly, 2, quacks on quackery, 3, the profits of cancer, 4, death and vaccination, 5, the foreign nation conspiracy, 6, wither AID, AIDS, the actions of fertilizer, number 7, number 8, contamination of the food supply, number 9, the drug trusts, and the last one is the Rockefeller syndrome. So the forward here is stating to you, the present work, the result of some 40 years of investigative research, is a logical progression from my previous books, the expose of the international control of monetary issues and banking practice in the United States, a later work revealing the secret network of organizations through which these alien forces wield political power, the secret committees, foundations, and political parties through which their hidden plans are implemented. And now to the most vital issues of all, the manner in which these depreciations affect the daily lives of the health of American citizens, despite the great power of the hidden rulers. I found that only one group has the power to issue life or death sentences to any American, our nation's physicians. I discovered that these physicians, despite their great power, were themselves subjected to very strict controls over every aspect of their professional lives. These controls, surprisingly enough, were not wielded by any state or federal agencies, although almost every other aspect of American life is now under the absolute control of the bureaucracy. The physicians have their own autocracy, a private trade association, the American Medical Association, which I read from Harry Hoxsey, that whole issue also. Hold on just a second here. I got to get something to drink water. The trail of these manipulators led me straight to the same layers of the international conspirators whom I have exposed in previous books. I knew that they had already looted America, reduced its military power to a dangerous low level, and imposed bureaucratic controls on every American. I now discover that their conspiracies also directly affect the health of every American, and the conspiracy will result in a documented decline in health of our citizens. We now rank far down the list of civilized nations in infant mortality and other significant medical statistics. I was able to document these shocking records of these cold-blooded tycoons who not only plan and carry out famines, economic depressions, and revolutions and war, but who also find their greatest profit in the manipulation of our medical care. The cynicalism and the malice of these conspirators is something beyond the imagination of most Americans. They deliberately uh, malign our people of millions of dollars each year through charitable organizations and then use these same organizations as key groups to bolster their medical monopoly. Fear and intimidation are the basic techniques by which the conspirators maintain their control over all aspects of our healthcare, as they ruthlessly crush any competitor who challenges their profits, as any other aspect of their behavioral control over the American people. Their most constant used weapon against us in their employment of federal agents and federal agencies to carry out their intrigues. The proof of this operation may be the most disturbing revelation of my work. This is based upon Eustace Mullins, February 22nd, 1988. Acknowledgements. I'm grateful to the staff of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. for their courtesy and cooperation in the preparation of this work. Chapter 1. The chapter is called The Medical Monopoly. The practice of medicine may not be the world's oldest profession, but is often seen to be operating on much the same principles. Not only does the client wonder if he is getting what he is paying for, but in many instances he is dismayed to find that he has actually gotten something he has not bargained for. An examination of the record shows that the actual methods of medical practice have not changed that much through the eons. The recent discoveries of Eberus, E-B-E-R-S, papyrus, shows that as early as 1600 BC, more than 900 prescriptions were available to the physicians, including opium as a pain-killing drug. As late as 1700, the commonly used medication, including cathartigas such as senna, S-E-N-N-A, aloe, and figs, and castor oil. Intestinal worms were treated by Aspergillium root, the male fern, that is, promulgated bark, or worm seed oil. In the East, this was obtained from the flowers of Santonium, S-A-N-T-O-N-I-N. In the Western Hemisphere, it was pressed from the fruit and leaves of Chemopalium. Anesthesias or pain relievers were alcohol, Hoxyamodius leaves, and opium. Hoxilium containing scopolamine used to induce twilight sleep in modern medicine. In the 16th century, Arabs used cochicum, a sulfate derivative for rheumatic pains and gout. Centaurea cincho, Choniton bark, the source of quinine, was used to treat malaria. Chaulmogra, chulmoga oil, was used for leprosy, and IPECAE for amoeba dysentery. Burn sponge at one time was used as a treatment for goiter, G-O-I-T-E-R. Its context of iodine provided the cure. Midwives used ergot to contract the uterus. Some 200 years ago, the era of modern medicine was ushered in by Sir Humphrey Davy's discovery of anesthesia properties of nitrous oxide. Michael Faraday discovered ether, and Wilhelm Sergeant isolated morphine from opium. Until the late 19th century, doctors practiced as freelance agents, which means that they assume all the risks of their decisions. You hear that? That's not true anymore, folks. In fact, you have to sign a piece of paper before you go in to get any kind of medical help so that you can actually, they're not responsible if something goes wrong. How the tables have turned in my lifetime. The poor rarely encountered a doctor, and as medical administrations were generally confined to the rich and powerful, curing a monarch could bring great monarchs can create a great reward, but failing to cure him could be a fatal mistake. Perhaps it was the awareness of the personal risks of this profession which gave rise to the plan for monopoly, to level out the risks and rewards among a chosen few. The attempts to build up their medical monopoly leave now created a modern plague, while the resolve to maintain this monopoly has cost the public dearly in money and suffering. Almost 5 centuries ago, one of the first attempts to set up this monopoly took place in England. The Act of 1511, signed into law by King Henry VIII in England, made it an offense to practice um, physics or surgery without the approval of a panel of experts. This act was formalized in 1518 with the founding of the Royal College of Physicians. In 1540, barbers and surgeons were granted similar powers. When the king granted approval of their company, they immediately launched a campaign to eliminate the unauthorized practitioners who had served the poor. Apparently, there's nothing new under the sun. As much the same campaign has long been underway, that is, in the United States. This harassment of doctors who served the poor caused such widespread suffering in England that King Henry VIII was forced to enact the Quacks Charter in 1542. This charter exempted the unauthorized practitioners and allowed them to continue their ministrations. No such charter had ever been granted in the United States, where a quack is not only as an unauthorized practitioner, that is, one who has not been approved by the AMA, the American Medical Association, that is, one of the government agencies under its control, but he is also subject to immediate arrest. It's interesting that the charting of quacks is not one of the features of English life which was passed on to its American colony. In 1617, the Society of Apothecarians was formed in England. In 1832, the British Medical Association was chartered. This became the impetus for the forming of a similar association, the American Medical Association of the United States. From its earliest inception, the American Medical Association has had one principal objective: attaining and defending a total monopoly of the practice of medicine in the United States. From its outset, the AMA made allopathic the basis of its practice. Allopathic was a type of medicine whose practitioners had received training in a recognized academy school of medicine and who relied heavily on surgical procedures and the use of medications. The leaders of this brand of medicine had been trained in Germany. They were dedicated to the frequent use of bleeding and heavy doses of drugs. They were inimical to any form of medicine which had not proceeded from the academias and which did not follow standardized or orthodox procedure. Allopathic set up an intense rivalry with the prevalent 19th school of medicine, the practice of homeopathic. This school was the creation of a doctor named Christian Hahnemann, that's Hahnemann, 1755 to 1843. It was based on his formula, Similis Serenitur, like cure like. Homeopathy is of even greater significance into our time because it works through the immune system using non-toxic doses of substances which are similar to those causing the illness. Even today, Queen Elizabeth is still treated by her personal homeopathic physician at Buckingham Palace. Didn't know that, did you? Yet in the United States, organized medicine continues its frantic drive to discredit and stamp out the practice of homeopathic medicine. Ironically, Dr. George H. Simmons, who dominated the American Medical Association from 1899 to 1924, building that organization to a national power, had for years run advertisements in Lincoln, Nebraska, where he practiced, which proclaimed that he was a homeopathic physician. Clinic trials have shown that homeopathic is as effective as certain widely prescribed authentic drugs, as also having the overriding advantage that it produces no harmful side effects. However, the accomplishment of homeopathy has historically been given the silent treatment, or if mentioned at all, it was greatly misinterpreted or distorted. A classical case of this technique occurred in England during the devastating outbreak of cholera in 1854. Records show that during this epidemic, deaths at homeopathic hospitals were only 16.4% as compared to death rates of 50% at the orthodox medical hospitals. The record was deliberately suppressed by the Board of Health of the City of London. My, oh my, nothing changes, does it? During the 19th century, the practice of homeopathy spread rapidly throughout the United States and Europe. Dr. Hahnemann had written a textbook called Homeopathical Material Medical, which enabled many practitioners to adopt his methods. In 1847, when the American Medical Association was founded in the United States, homeopathy outnumbered allopaths, the AMA type of doctors, by more than 2 to 1 because of the individualistic nature of homeopathic profession and the fact that they usually practice alone. They were unprepared for the concerted onslaught of the allopaths. From its beginning, the AMA proved that it was merely a trade lobby, which had been organized for the purpose of stifling competition and driving the homeopaths out of business. By the early 1900s, as the AMA began to achieve this goal, American medicine began to enter its dark age. Only now is beginning to emerge from those decades of darkness as a new holistic movement calls for treating the entire physical system instead of concentrating on one affected part. The distinctive feature of the AMA allopathic school of medicine was in constant self-advertisement promotion of a myth, the myth that its type of medicine was the only one which was effective. This pernicious development created a new monster, the mad doctor, as a person of absolutely infallibility, whose judgment must never be questioned. Most certainly his mistakes must never be mentioned. As Ivan Ilitch had pointed out in his shocking book, Medical Nemesis, that is, the Exploration of Health, 1976, not only had the effectiveness of the allopathic school of medicine proved to be the stuff of mythology, but the doctors had now brought new plagues into being. Illnesses which Ilitch defined as iatrogenous. I'll just spell it for you. IATROGENIC. Cause of plague, which these terms is iatrogenous. IATRO Genesis claims that this plague is now sweeping this nation. He defines iatrogenous as an illness which is caused by a doctor's medical intervention. Ilitch goes on to define 3 commonly encountered types of iatrogenous: clinical iatrogenous, which is doctor-made illnesses; social iatrogenous, which is deliberately created by the machinations of the medical industrial complex; and culturally iatrogenous, which saps the people's will to survive. Of the 3 types of iatrogenous, the third may be the most prevalent. That is, advertisements for various medications call it stress, the difficulty of surmounting the problem of everyday life, which are caused by totalitarian government and the sinister figures behind it, who operate it for their own personal gain. Confronted with this monstrous presence, which intrudes into every aspect of American citizens' daily life, many people are overcome by a feeling of hopelessness and are persuaded that there's nothing they can do. In fact, this monster is extremely vulnerable because it is so greatly overextended when an attack can be seen to be a paper tiger. We're going to continue on. Despite the AMA frenetic claims of improving medical care, records show that the state of American health is declining during the 19th century. It has shown steady improvement, probably because of the demonstrations of the homeopathic. A typical disease of the period was tuberculosis. In 1812, the death rate from tuberculosis in New York was 700 per 100,000. When Koch isolated the basilicus in 1882, this death rate had already declined to 370. In 1910, when the first TB sanitarium was opened, this rate had further declined to 180 per 100,000. By 1950, this death rate had dropped to 50 per 1,000. Medical records proved that a 90% decline in child mortality from scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, and measles occurred before the introduction of antibiotics and immunization from 1860 to 1896. This was also well before the Food and Drug Act was passed in 1905, which set up governmental control of interstate commerce in drugs. In 1900, there was only 1 doctor for every 750 Americans. They had usually served a 2-year apprenticeship, after which they could look forward to earning about the same salary as a good mechanic. In 1900, the AMA Journal, which was already under the editorship of Dr. George H. Simmons, sounded the call to arms. The growth of the profession must be stemmed if the individual members are to find the practice of medicine a lucrative profession. One would find difficulty in reading in the literature of any profession a more determined demand for monopoly. But how was this goal to be achieved? The Merlin who was to wave the magic wand and bring about the dramatic developments in the medical profession turned out to be none other than the richest man in the world, the insatiable monopolist John D. Rockefeller. Fresh from his triumph of organizing his gigantic oil monopoly, a victory as well blooded as any ancient Roman triumph. Rockefeller, the creation of the House of Rothschild, and his a creature of the House of Rothschild, and his Wall Street emissary Jacob Schiff realized that a medical monopoly might bring him even greater profits than his oil trust. In 1892, Rockefeller appointed Frederick T. Gates as his agent, conferring upon him the title of head of all his philanthropy endeavors. As it turned out, each of Rockefeller's well-publicized philanthropists was specifically designed to increase not only his wealth and power, but also the wealth and power of the hidden figures whom he also represented. Fred T. Gates first presented that his first present to Rockefeller was a plan to dominate the entire medical education system in the United States. The initial step was taken by the organization of the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research in 1907. The AMA requested the Carnegie Foundation to conduct a survey of all the medical schools of the nation. Even at this early date, the Rockefeller interests had already achieved substantial working control of the Carnegie Foundation, which had been maintained ever since. It is well known in the foundation world that the Carnegie Foundation, there are several, that is, are merely feeble adjuncts of the Rockefeller Foundation. The Carnegie Foundation named one Abraham Flexner to head up his study of medical schools. Coincidentally, his brother Simon was the head of the Rutherford Coincidentally, his brother Simon was the head of the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research. The Flexner Report was completed in 1910 after many months of travel and study. It was heavily influenced by the German-trained allopathic represented in the American medical profession. It was later revealed that the primary influence of Flexner had been his trip to Baltimore. He had been a graduate of Johns Hopkins University. This school had been established by Daniel Coate Gilman. Gilman had been one of the three original incorporators of the Russell Trust at Yale University, now known as the Brotherhood of Death. Its Yale headquarters had a letter in German authorization Gilman to set up this branch of the Illuminati in the United States. Gilman incorporated the Peabody Fund and John Slater Fund, which later became the Rockefeller Foundation. Gilman also became an original incorporator of Rockefeller's General Education Board, which was to take over the United States system of medical education. The Carnegie Foundation and the Russell Sage Foundation, as Johns Hopkins University, that is. Gilman also taught Richard Ely, who became the evil genius of Woodrow Wilson's education. Gilman's final achievement in the last year of his life was to advise Herbert Hoover on the advisement of setting up a think tank. Hoover later followed Gilman's plan in setting up the Hoover Institute after the First World War. This institution first furnished the movers and shapers of the Reagan Revolution, you see, in Washington. Not surprisingly, the American people found themselves saddled with even more debt and even more oppressive federal bureaucracy, all the result of Daniel Coate Gilman's Illuminati perspectives. Flexner spent much of his time at Johns Hopkins University finalizing his report. The medical school, which had only been established in 1893, was considered to be the very up-to-date. It was also the headquarters of the German Allopathic School of Medicine in the United States. Flexner, born in Louisville, Kentucky, had studied at the University of Berlin. The president of the Zionist Organization of America, that is Louise Brandeis, also from Louisville, was an old friend of the Flexner family. After Woodrow Wilson appointed Brandeis to the Supreme Court, Brandeis appointed himself a delegate to Paris to attend the Versailles Peace Conference in 1918. His purpose was to advance the goals of the Zionist movement at this conference. Bernard Flexner, who was then an attorney in New York, was asked to accommodate Brandeis, the official legal counsel to the Zionist delegation in Paris. Bernard Flexner later became a founding member of the Council of Foreign Relations and a trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation with his brother Simon. Simon Flexner had been appointed the first director of the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research at his organization in 1903. Abraham Flexner joined the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in 1908, serving there until his retirement in 1928. He also served for years as a member of Rockefeller's General Education Board. He was awarded a Rhodes Memorial Lectureship at Oxford University. His definite work was published in 1913 called Prostitution in Europe. Abraham Flexner submitted a final report to Rockefeller, which apparently was satisfactory in every way. His first point was emphatically agreement with the AMA layman that there were too many doctors. The Flexner solution was a simple one: to make medical education so elitist and expensive and so drawn out that most students would be prohibited from ever considering a medical career. The Flexner program set up requirements for 4 years of undergraduate college and a further 4 years of medical school. His report also set up a complex requirement for the medical schools. They must have expensive laboratories and other equipment. As the requirement of the Flexner report became effective, the number of medical schools were rapidly reduced. By the end of World War I, the number of medical schools had been reduced from 650 to a mere 50 in number. The number of annual graduates had been reduced from 7,500 to 2,500. The enactment of the Flexner restrictive virtually guaranteed that the medical monopoly in the United States would result in a small group of elitist students from well-to-do families, and that these small group would be subjected to intense controls. What has the Flexner report cost the average American citizen? Some recent statistics throw light in the situation. The New York Times reported that in 1985, the cost of health care per person in the United States was $1,800 per year. In England, it was $800 per year, and in Japan, it was $600 per year. Yet both England and Japan rank higher on the scale of quality of medical care from the United States than the United States. Compared to Japan, for instance, which had a higher living standard than the United States, but which furnished its citizens with quality medical care for $600 per person each year, comparatively medical care in the United States cannot be valued higher than $500 per year per person. What is the $1,300 per person difference? It is the $300 billion per year looting of the American public by the medical monopoly in overcharges, clinical syndicate activities, and the operation of the drug trust. And we're going to stop here at chapter 1, and we'll continue this tomorrow. It's time for me to say goodnight. Okay, so we'll start this another time. Yes, good to see you, Date. About time for me to go to bed. I gathered that I think you're out west, so you're probably a couple hours behind me. So I wish you a good evening. Anyway, that's tonight's talk, and we'll continue this tomorrow. Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins. Again, he's giving a history of what has taken place for the last 100 years in that first chapter. Thank you, and wish you all a good night. Take care.